Welcome to the Drift and Ramble podcast. I'm Steve Blizin. Each episode will explore true stories and American legends. From the pages of history and a few stories handed down over the years, we'll look at the people, places, and events that helped shape a nation. Stories of survival, notable frontier men and women, explorers who struck it rich, and the outlaws that stole it from them. There'll be studies of saloon girls, swindlers, banditry, and bad men, profiles of lawmen and American Indians, and the good and evil that existed between them. We'll amble through the past, we'll delve into the folklore of the times, and maybe even uncover a ghost story or two. So, saddle up, or settle in, for the Drift and Ramble podcast. This is episode 24. It is a dark and moonless night in Hydesville, New York. Inside an old, drafty, ramshackle farmhouse that is rumored to be haunted, there is a family about to experience something not of this world. Inside the tiny house, two young girls, aged just 14 and 11, are about to unleash something monstrous. A genie that can never be stuffed back into its bottle. On this chilly evening in March, the girls waylay a neighbor and share a frightening phenomenon. Every night, around bedtime, they tell their curious neighbor friend a series of raps and thuds. Strange noises emanate from the walls of their modest bedroom. But these sounds are not just random creaks and bends in wooden walls and floorboards. These seem to display a peculiar intelligence. The neighbor, of course, is skeptical, but intrigued. She joins the girls and their parents in the modest home. The girls' mother, Margaret, begins the demonstration.
On my command, Spirit, I insist you count to 5. Now, count to 15. Now tell me our neighbor's age. 33, is that correct? If you are an injured spirit manifested by 3 raps.
The neighbor gasps. The parents are so dismayed by this ghastly spirit manifestation, they abandon the house and send the girls to live with their older sister. A sinister spirit is suspected. Perhaps a murder victim, hidden in the walls. Or perhaps it is the devil himself. Whatever it is, it begins here with the Fox sisters. The girls have given birth to a new kind of religion, spiritualism. And though these innocent creatures have no idea what they have just done, they will soon find themselves at the center of controversy, in the vortex of discovery, and perhaps at the cursed end of their own cruel prank. The year is 1848, and the girls claim they have been talking with the dead. Within a year, the girls and their noisy spirits are playing to paying crowds. By 1850, their fame as mediums is so great, they command audiences from a myriad of famous and wealthy clientele. It isn't long before the girls find themselves embroiled in controversy, as imitators, hucksters, and carnival barkers seize on the profits that only communicating with the spirit world can bring. The girls will eventually reveal that their deception was nothing more than a childhood prank. But a curious thing has gripped the world, and the belief and desire for spiritualism are far too strong. Spiritualism is the monster unleashed, and it cannot and will not be denied. No one pays attention to their confession, and the world of seances and psychics grows exponentially. But the world has become a dark and confusing place. Religion has been challenged by the likes of Charles Darwin. Technologies emerge that begin to revolutionize industry, travel, medicine, and science. Still, mortality rates are high, and loved ones shed their mortal coils long before they've had the chance to live a fruitful life. Filled with sorrow, relatives and loved ones left behind look for answers that may ease their pain. Theories like mesmerism and spiritualism begin to thrive in the Victorian age. It's easy to match emerging technologies to seemingly scientific results. So, while the camera has already made its grand entrance into the technologies of the times, it's only a matter of time before the technology proves its both natural and supernatural prowess. The evolution is slow, as daguerreotype and calotype cameras evolve. But in 1857, with the advent of plate photography, so too does this opportunity for capturing images of the dead. The first of these spirit photographs occurs quite by accident in 1860, as W. Campbell is experimenting with his camera in his Jersey City, New Jersey home. He photographs an empty chair, develops the photo, and to his astonishment, there is a faint but visible image of a young boy in the frame.
What? What sorcery is this? Show yourself, boy! This studio is no playground. Make yourself known. I'm waiting. Bah!
He shows the mysterious photo at the 20th annual meeting of the American Photographic Society. Curiously, no one in attendance can explain the unusual image.
Strange indeed. Were you sure you closed the aperture completely? I say, he does look exceptionally ghostly.
Yes, of course. Even if I hadn't, there is no young boy alive within miles of my home.
Is it possible you combine 2 photograph plates in your developing solution?
No, I only own the one set. This photography hobby is a very expensive one indeed.
Indeed.
Campbell tries several more photos, but none produce another image of the child specter. Campbell and a few of his colleagues believe he may have captured a ghostly spirit, but he cannot reproduce the results. To form an image, these old plate cameras require expensive glass plates covered in a gel of photographic emulsion. The plates are then exposed while still wet. These expensive glass plates are simply cleaned and used over and over. An improper cleaning could easily result in transference of residue from one image to another. Yet colleagues at the American Photographic Society never consider this as a root cause for Campbell's odd photograph. And Campbell claims he's never seen the child before. And while Campbell and his single spirit photograph fade into history, a 29-year-old Boston jeweler tinkers away at his photographic hobby. His wife is engaged as a healing spiritualist. In 1861, the man is developing portraits of a workman when he discovers a second image embedded in the frame. The jovial jeweler turned photographer would later claim this was the catalyst for experimenting with spirit photography. Soon, William H. Mumler produces a self-portrait that also bears the image of a young girl. He claims the girl is a dear departed cousin and shows the picture to family members. It isn't long before Mumler's spirit photography business eclipses his regular job. His fees are said to be exorbitant, $10 per sitting, and with no guarantee of an apparition. Clients are so eager to capture an image of a loved one or a supernatural being, they flock to his studio and pay the outrageous price tag. But Mumler's work is not without controversy. Throngs of detractors arrive to find ways to debunk his techniques. One such man was a spiritualist himself, named Dr. Gardner, who, after sitting for Mumler in his Boston studio, recognized that some of the ghostly apparitions that appeared in these pictures were still, in fact, very much among the living, and living quite comfortably right here in the city of Boston.
Mr. Mumler, I should like to schedule a spirit photographic session with you.
Very well, Doctor. That'll be $10. Of course, you must understand, however, I cannot guarantee that you will see any spirits in the photographs I take. These unearthly beings only show themselves on their own whim. I have no control with what regularity or to whom the spirits will show themselves.
Very well then, Mr. Mumler, but you should know that I am a medium, and I regularly consort with the dearly departed. I have every confidence that if spirits do reveal themselves in your photographs, they will reveal themselves to me as well.
Very good, Doctor. Now let's try one seated, shall we? Back straight, chin up. Now face the camera in a thoughtful pose. Perfect. Okay. Steady. Steady. Hold. Perfect. Now if you'll excuse me while I develop these plates.
Oh, you shouldn't need to excuse yourself, dear Mr. Mumler. I would like to watch you and your process in developing these plates.
Very well. Step this way into my laboratory. Mind you, I shall keep the lights dim so as not to overexpose the plates. There we are. And look. You're in luck. 2 ghostly images appear.
Here, let me see that one. I happen to have my magnifying glass with me, and... Yes. Impressive indeed. There is a ghostly image here.
A long-lost relative, perhaps, Dr. Gardner?
Well, not a relative, and certainly not long lost. This is Mrs. Finch from the butcher shop at the corner of Myrtle and Joy Streets. I recognize her immediately. I was just by there this morning buying bacon. And this man is Clarence Pemberton from the Beacon Street Bakery. I'd know that man anywhere. These ghostly spirits are fakes. You, sir, are a marvelous fraud.
Preposterous. Outrageous. Absurd. Dr. Gardner, I must ask you to leave my studio at once.
Though the accusations hurt Mumler's business, he continues undaunted, and most of his clients seem genuinely satisfied with the results of their spiritual photography sessions. But as the years pass, Mumler's detractors become more and more enraged. Regular photographers found the practice of photographing ghosts an insult to the profession of photography. They bristled at the thought of such an unscrupulous business. Speculation on how Mumler is deceiving his quarry is common conversation among anyone with a camera. But the Civil War, it seemed, was a major contributing factor in the success of Mumler's photography business. Loved ones, suffering from loss, sought a final, hopeful image of departed soldiers, sons, brothers, or fathers. Mumler was there, providing his costly services to any willing customer with the fees to pay for his service. Although Mumler was not alone in the new field of spirit photography, many of his contemporaries were less proficient with their skills. They were also attacked for defrauding an unsuspecting public. Many of these hucksters were quickly exposed. As the public became slightly more aware of the ease with which photographs could be manipulated, Mumler, and men like him, found their business eroded by suspicion. But Mumler was perhaps at the pinnacle of all spirit photographers. Amidst the suspicion was the side benefit of constant publicity from the press. And he also had something many other spiritual photography outfits simply didn't enjoy: an exclusive stream of high-profile clientele with very deep pockets. When James Black stepped forward to disprove these photos of the dead, the famous Boston aerial photographer was so confident he could spot Mumler's ruse, He bet the man $50 he could catch him. Black then inspected all of his gear, processing supplies, and even followed the suspected trickster into his dark room. As the image materialized on the negative, Mr. Black, wonderstruck by the mysterious specter, declared,
"My God! Is it possible?"
In 1863, Boston native Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote an essay for the Atlantic Monthly, in which he detailed specific instructions on how to create a double exposure image. Holmes, himself an accomplished photographer, openly pondered how Mumler had created such ghostly images. Using the example of a grief-stricken mother mourning the loss of her infant son, he wrote,
"It is enough for the poor mother, whose eyes are blinded with tears, that she sees a print of drapery like an infant's dress, and around it something like a foggy dumpling, which will stand for a face." Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Business began to fall off sharply, as more often than not, the words Mumler and hoax were spoken in the same sentence. Boston had become a poor place for the spirit photographer to do his business. So he moved his spirit photography studio to New York. In the meantime, a seemingly unlikely player in the carnival of spirit photography releases a book debunking hundreds of common myths, cons, and deceptions. And it has its own chapter devoted to spirit photography. It is titled, Humbugs of the World, an account of humbugs, delusions, impositions, quackeries, deceits, and deceivers, generally in all ages. And it is written by none other than P.T. Barnum.
I am determined, so far as in me lies, to publish nothing but the truth. This I shall do, with good motives and for justifiable ends, and I shall do it fearlessly and conscientiously. No threats will intimidate, no fawnings will flatter me from publishing everything that is true, which I think will contribute to the information or to the amusement of my readers. If we could have full exposure of the tricks of trade of all sorts, of humbugs and deceivers of past times, religious, political, financial, scientific, quackish, and so forth, we might perhaps look for a somewhat wiser generation to follow us. I shall be well satisfied if I can do something towards so good a purpose. Phineas Taylor Barnum.
Meanwhile, Mumler markets himself in New York in much the same way as he did in Boston, but perhaps now with the benefit of more experience behind him.
It is now some 8 years since I commenced to take these remarkable pictures, and thousands bear testimony to the truthful likeness of their spirit friends they have received through my mediumistic power. What joy to the troubled heart! What balm to the aching breast! To know that our friends who have passed away can return and give us unmistakable evidence of a life hereafter.
By early 1869, Mumler is the best-known spiritual photographer in New York. He is approached by a Wall Street financier named Charles Livermore. Livermore, it turns out, is working as an investigative reporter for the New York Sun, and he, along with a team of other reporters and investigators, are preparing to do a story on the photographic apparitionist. But Livermore's careful observations and judgment are perhaps clouded by grief and a longing for his dead wife. The investigation goes awry when Mumler presents Livermore with what he believes to be a ghostly image of his dear departed. Livermore finds nothing criminal about the spirit photographer. He leaves satisfied that Mumler is the real deal. In March, Mumler is visited by another new client. He introduces himself as William Bowditch.
Hey, you the fellow that takes those ghostly pictures?
Yes, yes. Please come in. Have a seat. Tell me, how can I help you?
Well, I just lost a relative, and
Well, I'm sorry for your loss. Now, I can't guarantee your photograph will have a spirit. They only show themselves around certain people or certain times. But as long as you understand that, We'll get along just fine.
Yes, I understand.
Stand here, please. Back straight. Well, that will be $10, by the way.
$10? Why, that's highway robbery.
But you haven't even seen your photo yet.
Don't have to. I'm only here to see how you rob people. See this badge? My name's really Joseph Tooker, and I'm a city marshal here in New York. Seems we got some complaints about you down at the mayor's office, and I'm here to see what all the trouble is.
Well, I can assure you, I've done nothing wrong. Look, here's your picture.
Ain't no specter. Just as I suspected.
I told you, they don't always turn up.
Tell it to the judge, Mumler. See you in court.
Mumler is later arrested and charged with swindling credulous persons by what he called spirit photographs. When the trial begins in April of 1869, P.T. Barnum testifies against Mumler. He is selected as an expert witness in part because of his book exposing humbugs, and more specifically, its chapter dedicated to exposing fraudulent spirit photographers. But the trial itself quickly evolves into a spectacle in its own right. Client Charles Livermore's cherished spirit photo is among those called into evidence. It is immediately exposed as a fake, by the prosecution explaining that shadows cast by Livermore are different than the shadows cast by the so-called specter of his alleged dear-departed wife. And just how is it that ghosts can cast shadows in the first place? Another client of Mumler's takes the stand. It is a former Justice of the New York Supreme Court, Judge John Edmonds, who shocks the courtroom when he testifies that not only can he see the dead, but that he also converses with them regularly during trials, and they assist him with his decisions. He tells the court that he was satisfied with his spirit pictures, as the spirits were charmingly pretty. Barnum delights the public, turning the courtroom into a spectacle for the masses. After all, the man is most famous for his three-ring circus. Barnum testifies that while writing his book exposing humbugs, he purchased several spirit photographs to investigate. And the man he purchased them from was none other than William Mumler. He continues that,
After I purchased these pictures, Mr. Mumler and I exchanged several letters. In them, he confessed to me that these pictures were fakes.
Is that so, Mr. Barnum? Can you produce these letters for the court to review?
Sadly, these letters were all lost when my museum burned down in 1865.
when Luthera Reeves takes the stand, she positively identifies the ghostly image in her picture as her dead son.
Well, of course that's my son. You can see by the image that he suffers from a curvature of the spine, just like my poor boy did. There's no doubt that this is a specter of my child.
Defense attorney John Townsend seized on this testimony, making it nearly impossible for the prosecution to argue any further.
Your Honor, people of the court, how could this man be accused of fraud when people clearly recognize their loved ones in the pictures?
Barnum still has one more trick up his sleeve. He hires famed daguerreotype photographer Abraham Bogardus to demonstrate how easy it is to create a fictitious photograph. Bogardus creates an image depicting deceased President Abraham Lincoln. And this example will prove to be a strange coincidence indeed. When the trial concludes, Mumler is acquitted. Though the judge feels that Mumler is deceiving his clients, no hard evidence of a crime can be produced. Mumler leaves the court a free man, but his reputation is in tatters. And here is where the story really gets strange. About a year or two after the trial has concluded, according to many of the resources I consulted, either in 1871 or 1872, a mysterious woman comes to sit for William Mumler. This would become the most famous photograph in all of Mumler's catalog. According to Mumler himself, the woman, dressed in all black and wearing a heavy veil, identifies herself as Miss Lindahl or Tyndall and insists that she keep her long, dark veil over her face until just before the photograph is taken. Only when she raises the veil does Mumler recognize who is seated before him. It is the former First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln. 7 years after the death of her husband, Mary Todd Lincoln is once again reunited with her man. In the photograph Mumler produces, the image of Abraham Lincoln stands behind Mary Todd with his arms draped over her shoulders. The image becomes one of the most widely reproduced spirit images of all time. Mary Todd was thought to have gone crazy. In fact, the former president's image was even used as evidence against Mumler in his very high-profile court trial. She must have been crazy to sit for Mumler after all this bad press. But sit for him she did, and in doing so, made spirit photography something that can never be erased from America's weird and wonderful history. The ghostly image of Mr. Lincoln may fade, but the indelible mark of spirit photography is forever etched on our collective photographic plate. In 1875, Mumler published his memoirs, titled The Personal Experiences of William Mumler in Spirit Photography. In his introduction, Mumler wrote,
"Before commencing to take spirit pictures, I had a reputation as an honest and trustworthy person, enjoying for many years the confidence of the leading jewelers of Boston, in whose employ I was, and often being entrusted with their valuables to a large amount. But this reputation, that I had been years in establishing, vanished like a soap bubble when I commenced to take spirit photographs. I was condemned as a trickster, branded as a fraud, and deserted by those who were happy to acknowledge my acquaintance when in, to them, a more honorable business. And strange as it may seem, many of my strongest opponents have been professed spiritualists, men who have seen and are familiar with the difficulties that attend the demonstration of spiritual truths, who, while endeavoring to enlighten a skeptical and bigoted world with new truths, will, at the same time, with the same skepticism and bigotry, denounce other truths of which they have not been convinced. Consistency, thou art a jewel."
Like the famous Fox sisters of New York, Mumler and his camera have opened a Pandora's box, one that may never be closed. And just like the Fox sisters, the famous spirit photographer dies penniless, all but forgotten. Yet Mumler's photographs live on. He could have been a very wealthy man. It turns out he held many patents on photographic equipment plans and processes that could have revolutionized photography. William Mumler died in 1884. Over the years, many others would carry the torch for spirit photography. Dignitaries, luminaries, actors, and authors all join their ranks. Among them are Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and he is so strongly convinced he writes the Daily Express about the paper's editorial treatment of the topic in 1919. What follows is an excerpt.
Sir, I am convinced that if your correspondents were to examine the literature on spirit photography, they would treat it more seriously than most of them seem inclined to do. It might occur in some cases that a plate used twice would show some trace of the former exposure, but as the extra faces are often not in front of the sitters, such an explanation becomes impossible. There are other spirit photographs, which would appear to be real photographs in the ordinary sense, the camera recording that which the human eye cannot see. The more that a man looks into this subject, the more he will find that it deserves worthy study, and not unworthy sneers. Arthur Conan Doyle.
Doyle even writes a book titled The Case for Spirit Photography, which is published in 1922. Spirit photography did not die with William Mumler. In fact, the practice continues to this day. Over the years, Many people have claimed to capture images of unexplainable origins. Some are quite disturbing, and others are clearly fakes. Though the temptation to fake photography of otherworldly phenomenon is too strong for some to resist, others, like P.T. Barnum, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and Eric Weiss, or perhaps you know him better as Harry Houdini, fought to separate the fakes from authentic photographs. Houdini, like his contemporaries, was hoping to clear the field of fakery so that only authentic apparitions could come through. Houdini exposed phony mediums with a vengeance and inspired many modern magicians to follow suit. But when the double-edged pendulum of spiritualism swung back the other way, it deeply severed the friendship between Houdini and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Houdini had exposed, as a fraud, a man who Sir Arthur Conan Doyle felt was capable of summoning supernatural powers. Doyle was incensed over the humiliation of his friend. So much so that the magician and the author squared off and ended their friendship, turning instead into bitter enemies. Meanwhile, the quest for spirit photographs persists even today. You can find dozens of ghost hunting television shows dedicated to documenting floating orbs as spiritual manifestations. Their temperature gauges record sudden, unexplainable dips in degrees. Dimly lit rooms allegedly illuminated by tiny particles of light that drift past lenses, while exuberant hosts profess their enthusiasm and identify these tiny globes of light as spirits. The sleepless crew, miles of cables, truckloads of electronic equipment that whir and blink in haunted spaces, all gathered in anticipation of that moment when we finally, unequivocally, know that we have witnessed a specter from beyond the other side. Today, there are more cameras in more places than at any other time in history. You'd think by now we would have seen the unseen. But just how will we know when we've seen it? Will someone tell us that we have? Or do we trust our natural instincts and indicators that reside in our limbic system? Fear, fight or flight, that chill down your spine, or the hair standing up on the back of your neck. Spirits that leap in front of game cameras, flickering floodlights controlled by motion detectors, triggered by mysterious movement. Surveillance cameras that slowly pan and scan, capturing shadowy figures in deserted hallways, opening and closing doors. Ghostly sounds captured on recording gear. If spirits want to make contact with you, you'd better believe they'll make themselves known. The only question that remains is, are you prepared to deal with it? Until we meet again, I'm Steve Blizin. See you at the next installment of the Drift and Ramble podcast. Many resources were utilized in preparing for this episode. Although every effort has been made to provide fact, some discrepancies may arise. I'd like to acknowledge the following resources. The Case for Spirit Photography by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Smithsonian Magazine, smithsonianmag.com. Wikipedia.org. Encyclopedia of 19th Century Photography, edited by John Hannavy. History.net. Haunting Museums by John Schuster. The History of Spirit Photography, The Haunted Museum, prairieghosts.com. The True Mary Todd Lincoln by Betty Bowles Ellison. Humbugs of the World, an account of humbugs, delusions, impositions, quackeries, deceits, and deceivers, generally in all ages, by P.T. Barnum. The Personal Experiences of William Mumler in Spirit Photography, by himself. I'd like to say a special thank you to Julian Searles and his welding capabilities for removing the squeaks from my studio chair. Just about every episode, I say thank you to all my listeners, and it may sound like it's routine to you, but it truly is sincere. I can't believe how many people listen to this show and who those people are, and the feedback that I get from you makes everything worthwhile. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate that. One way you can show your support for the show is to leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher or any place where reviews are able to be left. Leaving a review for this show requires nothing but a couple of minutes of your time, and I sure would appreciate it. I want to say thank you to all the folks using the Podern Family hashtag. Using the Podern Family hashtag, you can find a number of great shows to listen to, great people, and a wonderful community of supportive podcasters. Hashtag Podern Family. As you know, the Drift and Ramble podcast is part of the Fate Crafters Network. Fate Crafters is a group of highly talented writers, producers, performers, sound designers, and composers creating some of the most compelling audio drama content available today. Some of the shows are full-cast audio dramas, and others, like Spines, are single narrator stories so well conceived, written, and produced that you become immersed in the story long before you realize it. Imagine if you woke up one day, covered in blood, suffering from memory loss, and surrounded by the remnants of some strange cult ritual. Spines is the story of Ren's search for answers, and the strange and powerful people she meets along the way. Spines is one of my personal favorites among the Fate Crafters shows. It evokes a high level of suspense while pulling you deeper and deeper into the mystery. Spines is expertly written by Jamie Killen, and I'm confident that after one listen, you'll find yourself subscribed. Spines is on iTunes, Stitcher, and wherever else fine podcasts are found. You can also find Spines on Facebook and on Twitter at Spines Podcast. Be sure to check out the complete lineup of Fate Crafters audio drama content at fatecrafters.net. A huge thanks to all the fine folks at Pulp Pourri Theater and Audio Oblivious Productions for their efforts in making this episode possible. You can visit our Patreon page for a complete cast list, show notes, links to resources, and other information. And there's absolutely no cost for you to obtain this information. While you're there, I hope you will consider supporting our show and consider that we're completely commercial-free to protect your listening experience. When listeners are our sponsors, everybody wins. You can find us at patreon.com/driftandramble. patreon.com/driftandramble. Next time on the Drift and Ramble podcast, we'll meet a man whose very name evokes bravery in the face of fear. In fact, his name became the battle cry for America's paratroopers in World War II. But just how did that happen? And who was the man we all know as Geronimo? Until we meet again, I'm Steve Blizin. See you on the next installment of the Drift and Ramble podcast.
The Drift and Ramble podcast is a Clear Voice Media production. Additional contributions and content have been made possible by support from individuals dedicated to the art and science of storytelling and exploring the still fertile promise of the American West.